Okay, welcome to the City of Asheville's inaugural budget work session. I mean, meaning the first of many,
First of many.
I guess. Initial, maybe not inaugural.
No.
Initial.
Initial for this year.
Kylo Ren will be kicking us off.
Thank you for that.
So if you don't mind, if I could say a few,
All right, Deborah Campbell will help Kylo Ren.
a few things. So, good afternoon, Mayor, Council, and folks in the audience, and Happy New Year, by the way. This budget work session is designed to accomplish a couple of things. First, we want to provide you with kind of a status report of where we are as it relates to almost 6 months into the 2019-2020 budget. We will literally give you a gauge of where we are in terms of revenue and expenses. We will provide an update as part of the discussion on our current budget. We'll provide you with an update on the compensation and classification study, and we'll give a lot of detail on the first phase of the analysis, which was to look at the potential of moving the minimum pay for an employee working 40 hours to $31,200. Peggy Rowe will be giving that presentation, but we do have the consultants that is doing the comp and class study for us. They're in the audience. We will also, as part of our update in terms of this gauge, we need to highlight an area for you related to the enterprise fund that is expected to be over budget. And we need to explain what we need to do using general funds to address that issue. Second part of the presentation, if that wasn't enough, will be to update you on the process and progress made to date in terms of developing the 2020-21 budget, so the next fiscal year's budget. Budget staff took off a little bit of time during the summer, this past summer, and immediately early fall, we started the future budget process cycle all over again. We'll also update you on what we think are projected revenues and expenses, and quite frankly, begin to telegraph kind of a recurring theme that our needs are just far outpacing our revenue.
One sec, Maggie, we've got a crashed computer system here, so can you can't get on either?
No.
Maybe.
Okay, you're on.
Well,
I don't think I'm on.
Keisha just came back to life.
I just had to close it.
Okay?
Maggie's high-tech skills, she has closed the laptop and opened it. Okay.
Please do not turn it off.
So, most of this presentation, a lot of the details is going to be focused on the operating budget. Not to say we aren't going to mention the capital budget, but a lot of it will be related to operating, because that's where we have the most information that we can share. And then lastly, we will conclude with asking you all if there's any additional information, different information that you need for your upcoming council retreat, which is scheduled for Valentine's Day, February the 14th. And before you scowl and say what a terrible person we are for making you work on Valentine's Day, we appreciate your heart's in the right place.
Well, same to you guys. You have to work on Valentine's Day.
Yeah. So we'll be providing you also with, if you can change to the next slide. Too fast? All right. Kind of some guiding principles. These were adopted for the current budget. And we hope that you would consider these, or maybe be thinking about others that you may want to consider as we move into the preparation for the 2020-21 budget process. So our guiding principles were essential service delivery, ensuring departments have the resources required to meet service delivery expectations, enhancing customer value, that is making sure that our constituents are getting the kind of quality services that they deserve, and then strategic alignment. You all took a lot of time at our last retreat prioritizing your strategic initiatives and priorities that you wanted us to focus on. The strategic alignment is simply making sure that what you said you want to get accomplished, that we have revenue devoted, funding devoted to implementation. So with that, I will turn it over to Taylor, and then later Barbara Whitehorn is going to come up and talk a little bit about the strategic initiatives.
Thank you, Deborah. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Taylor Floyd, the Budget Manager. I'm going to start off, as Deborah mentioned, just talking about where we're at in the current fiscal year, kind of give you a sense of that since we're about halfway through the year now. Starting off, hopefully this looks familiar to you. This is our current year general fund budget, and really we're just showing you this to remind you that most of our revenue comes from property sales and utility taxes. It's about 80% of the total. So if you look at where we're at current year right now on that, we're on target, doing well. Property tax, we don't really have a lot of property tax data yet for the current year, but typically the estimates that the county tax assessor's office provides us are pretty spot on, because they know what they're doing over there. We actually had a meeting with them earlier last week and kind of confirmed that things are looking as we would expect so far. We actually only have about 3 months of data on sales and utility taxes, just because the state collects those, so the reporting is a little bit delayed on that. But again, based on that quarter of data, things are looking good. That other is a small portion, but it's looking better than expected, mainly because of some good performance on investment revenues and some licenses and permits revenues. So moving to the other side, on the expenses, again, all of our major expenditure categories looking on track. Performance-wise, about halfway through the year. Personnel costs, is our biggest expense. Typically, that's looking almost right on. We're almost exactly halfway through our number of pay cycles for the year and looking right on budget just on that. So things are looking well. And with that, I'm actually going to pass it off to Peggy Rowe, and she's going to talk about the total compensation study.
And as Peggy is coming up, after each major section of the presentation, we do have time for questions and discussion.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. I want to give you an update on where we are with our compensation study. First thing I'll do is just remind you at a high level what the scope of work was for the consultant that we engaged. And I do have Marianne Oyes here from the Archer Company. She's a representative from our consultant if we have any questions about the work she's done. I'll give you an update on phase 1 of the project and some preliminary findings regarding phase 1. And then we'll have some recommendations and summary and next steps. So just as a refresher, the consultants were engaged to analyze the city's salary and benefits package. And they are charged with providing a recommendation to the city manager on whether or not our current pay and benefits package is competitive with the market, evaluating the feasibility of raising our minimum salary to $31,200 annually, which is, as Deborah said earlier, based on a 40-hour work week. What, if any, compression issues exist, and how should those be addressed? And what, if any, other inequities exist in our pay plan, and how should those be addressed? So the first phase is the scope of work includes assessing the impact of moving to that minimum wage that we talked about earlier. So they were charged with calculating and estimating the base pay and the related cost associated with moving all of the employees who are currently earning less than $31,200 to $31,200. They evaluated the impact of these increases on the base pay of the employees who are earning in that low labor market, and they've made some recommendations to us as to what the cost would be. And we asked them to keep really just focused on those low-level positions that have the low entry salary ranges. Will the increase of the 31.2 cause greater compression? And they were asked to determine how to address that identified compression and determine the timing necessary to address those compression adjustments. And just so we have kind of a shared definition of compression, that's a situation that occurs when there's only a small difference in pay between employees regardless of their skills or experience. And it often results if the market rate for a given job is outpacing the increases historically given by the organization to high tenured employees. The movement of the salaries to the 31.2 aligns with Council's commitment to the concept of a living wage. And again, just so we have a kind of an understanding of living wage, it's understood to mean the ability to afford food, housing, and other essential items. There's no one definition, but just so we kind of share that definition. There are many cities in the U.S. that are raising their minimum wage. Some large employers are raising their minimum, including Walmart, Target, Costco, and Amazon, to salaries up to or at least toward that $15 an hour. And as you know, the City of Asheville, Buncombe County, and other local employers have committed to pay at a minimum a current living wage. The city's current salary and benefits survey that Archer Company has already implemented will provide additional information regarding current practices in comparable municipalities related to pay for entry-level jobs. So preliminary findings of Phase 1, which is that movement to the minimum. Of the 1,256 employees that we currently have, regular and part-time, full-time and part-time, we have approximately 93 who are currently earning less than the 31.2. And you can see by this graph that, or by this chart, excuse me, that many of the positions are laborers, they work in water, equipment operators, public works, against many of our entry-level type positions. And some of those are enterprise funds, and some of them fall in the general fund. The estimated annualized cost for adjusting those 93, and the number that you see here includes the benefits, the projected overtime for those employees. The salary, including overtime, is at $343,800, and then the additional benefits would be $68,760 for a total of $412,560. So if the 31.2 becomes the new wage floor, this was part of the compression analysis, the shift causes additional compression as a group of employees' pay shifts upward. So the adjustments of 31,200 applies to those earning less than that, regardless of how long they've been in the job. Compression focuses on employees in pay grades where employees would be moving to the 31,200. So that, again, that's the area that we ask the consultants to focus on. There are additional employees who would potentially be impacted by that new wage increase, and the cost to adjust that compression would be $30,000 to $196,000, and that number represents about 87 additional employees whose salary are in those 201 to 206 lower pay grades that we have. And that number will vary depending on what methodology is used to address that compression. And then naturally there would be additional pay compression in other pay grades as you move that floor. Does that make sense so far? Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Peggy, can you explain that third bullet point, there's likely to be pay compression in other pay grades? I understand everything up until that point. So,
yeah.
So who are those employees that you're talking about?
So the pay grade 206, for example, it begins at around, begins over the $15 an hour jobs, about $15.20 or something like that is the minimum salary for those. So they already earn 31.2. But when you move the other folks under the 31.2 and make their adjustments to 31.2, you have employees who are earning 31.3, for example, just making that up, or 31.2, or excuse me, 31.4, who have possibly been here for a number of years. And so as you move the pay grades 201 to 206 up, which is addressing this number, then the employees who are in the 207 are also impacted by that movement.
So in terms of what was on slide 18, oh, excuse me, what was on the slide 19, the 30,000 to 196,000, is that compression only for folks in the 201 to 206 pay grade? Is that only dealing with compression within those groups? So 207 onward, compression to the extent that exists, which would exist, is that not taken into account in the 30,000, 196,000?
To a certain extent, it is. It's not fully taken into consideration because we have found that there's a great deal of manual work that has to be done to really ascertain the length of time employees have been in their position and things like that. But when you move the 31.2, for example, the 31.2 represent 93 employees, and then there are additional 87 for a total of, 180 employees who are impacted in those 201 to 206 pay grades. So if you may move someone to 31.2, for instance, who's been here for 6 years, or 7 or 8. And so when you make that movement, and then on top of that, you move the folks who are just shy of 31.2, who've maybe been in their pay grade for a year, you have to consider whether or not to make adjustments to the folks whose pay you've already adjusted to the 31.2. So it does include the 87 additional, but it also includes slight adjustments to those in the 93 category that you've already made an adjustment for.
So what I'm trying to get at, Peggy, here is in terms of that, what I'm trying to understand is kind of the context of that second bullet point, the 30,000 to 196,000, right? Because if we're sitting here on council trying to understand the cost of this, we're kind of adding the 412, 560 to those two numbers. And what I'm trying to get at is, are those two numbers right there, the 30,000, 196,000, I'm trying to sort of reconcile that number with that third bullet. And what I'm trying to get a sense is that 196,000 kind of worst case scenario
Yes.
if we pulled the trigger? But would that also impact the compression in other pay grades, right? So does that 196,000 cover there is likely to be pay compression in other pay grades? Or if we address the compression in other pay grades, that 196,000 could actually be higher?
It could be higher. The 196 only addresses the compression that would be caused by within the pay grades 201 to 206. So once that movement is done, then you would have 207, 208, and so forth.
Right, okay.
So
And if I could interrupt for just a minute, we have to admit that we wish that we could have been further along in the analysis, but we do have some challenges with how we are collecting the data. Unfortunately, our software doesn't have all the information that we need to deliver to the consultants for them to do a lot of their analysis. So we've literally had to have HR do some things manually. So we're still plodding along, and this is definitely an update.
Yes.
We will have, by the time of the retreat, we will have a lot more definitive information and clarity.
For sure. Okay, thank you. Next steps. When phase 2 of the total compensation study is complete, the following recommendations will be provided to city manager and then subsequently to the council. Position compensation based on duties and responsibilities of all employees. Adjustments for market and internal compensation inequities. Adjustments to address pay compression in the current pay plan and the impact of any new pay grades and new pay ranges. Additionally, as Deborah mentioned, first of all, let me say that phase 1 does identify the 93 who need to be raised to 31.2 if it's your desire to do that. It supports the commitment to adjust lower pay rates first. So we haven't even looked at any of the higher paid and the impact there. Staff will provide additional information and options for you to be more informed when we reach the retreat in February. And then the timeline for Phase 2, additional data collection, including the market analysis, is going on right now and will be through the end of March. We should have a preliminary report in April or May, and then a final report in May or June, so early summer.
And we'll definitely have at least enough information, whether we have it neatly bound report. That may take us a little longer, but we will have the information to incorporate it into the budget discussion.
Other questions?
So we'll have information on Phase 1 by the retreat
Yes, sir.
to make a decision
Definitive.
before we actually do the budget?
Yes, sir. You had asked us to look at the 31,200 and determine if we could implement something this year. And that's
Meeting July 1.
actually
This
this fiscal
fif- this-
year,
this-
before July 1. That's
Right.
what was asked of us by council when you approve the current budget that we're in right now. And we do have some funds set aside to do that. It's just how much can we do?
Thank you.
So in terms of the methodology, is the methodology then, with respect to the compression, that what we'll have in February is basically a compression analysis organizational-wide, is that right? So we're going to go from basically 201 kind of throughout the whole thing, right? So if we were to pull the trigger, we're going to have an understanding that there's, you're not going to get it down to $1, right? I get that. But is the methodology that we're looking to do, and I'm looking at the consultants' faces, they're like starting.
Yeah, I'm looking at the
Yeah,
consultant.
and again, just
Yeah.
make sure we're
Yes.
make sure we're straight on
Yes,
this.
sir.
Is that the goal of the methodology, that we're going to look organization-wide?
Yes, sir.
As to what that compression?
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay.
And in terms of any change that we might make in this fiscal year, obviously, that's not going to cost $412,000 because we're
That's correct.
in the second,
Mhm.
at least in the second half of this fiscal year. But clearly, we will need to be making this decision at the same time.
Yes.
About whether we're going to whether we're going to true people up with this 412 plus at least the lower level compression, and when we're going to start that. And so when do you anticipate we will make that decision or should make that decision?
We will bring you the information in February. We can then queue up a decision in March for
Okay.
you, because we'll be meeting on the 14th. I don't know if, we may have another meeting in
Okay.
February. So it could, I will say late February, early March.
So essentially in March, we need to be thinking that essentially we may be committing ourselves to this 412 plus maybe 196 plus more.
For a year.
In March.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
But that
getting
will be part of an annual budget
Right.
report.
That's correct.
Right, but we wouldn't make the decision, we're not going to make the decision to raise and then not. So
Right,
if
yeah.
we make the decision to start this year, we're committing
Yeah,
ourselves.
that's
We,
what we're
we,
really making
we
the
would
decision.
certainly hope
That's
that that would be the case.
That would be
Fake. Sorry.
And that's actually the purpose for these early discussions about the budget. There are lots of, you may recall, I said, need outstripping revenue. There are lots of things like this that we are trying to give you some early information. We're not asking for a decision on anything today, but we just want to raise awareness.
And I'll just remind us that transit was another one of those that we had.
And we will, it's part of the
Yeah.
presentation.
Excellent.
Just one final
Yes,
question.
sir.
What would be helpful to, whenever you all get the chance to do it, on slide 17, we have those positions. It would be helpful to hear from you all too, once we get to the retreat, whether there are any vacancies in those positions. Are you having trouble hiring people? Are you having trouble retaining people? Give us a sense at that point, whether it's a point in time or an over a year, if you can, what sort of difficulties, or if you're not having difficulties hiring or retaining employees in those positions.
Great, we'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to say, Ms. Campbell, thank you, and to staff, We had the conversation back during the budget cycle last summer to try to get this information done, and you made a statement that you would make it in your best effort and power to get that done, and you have, and your staff has done that as well, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, I'm back. So for a little bit of a jarring turn here, we're going to wrap up with the current year general fund summary. This is really, again, with the information that we have right now, where we think we would end the current fiscal year. And good news, we think revenues are going to come in around $800,000 over expenses right now, but I want you to hold that for a minute because we're going to come back to it after a few slides. So I'm going to move on to our enterprise funds. We have 6 enterprise funds. 5 of them are represented here. Looking at revenues and expenses to date, again, all of those tracking on target as we would expect. However, our last enterprise fund here, the transit fund, we're actually projecting a $500,000 shortfall in the transit fund for the current fiscal year. And just to give you a little bit of background on what we think is driving that, it's really kind of 2 things. One is fuel and electricity costs, and some of that is related to the estimates that we had for related to the new electric buses and some fuel savings that we haven't realized and some electricity costs being higher than we anticipated. The second piece of that, and the fuel and electricity is really only about $100,000 of that $500,000. The much larger piece is the paratransit service. And if you look at this, these numbers down at the bottom here, I'll kind of point out 2 different things. First, if you look at the middle, the FY20 budget to estimate, you can see that's a pretty big jump. But if you look at the actuals and then the estimate for 20 and 21, we're also seeing some really significant increases in that cost of service. And the 2 main reasons for that are increased usage, so increased ridership, and then longer trips. So a little bit more information on paratransit and on that service. As a public transit provider, we're actually required by the ADA to provide this paratransit service for people with disabilities that have limited mobility, maybe can't use the bus. We actually provide a higher level of service than federally required. We provide door-to-door service for those trips. And that's a service that we contract with Buncombe County to provide. So we're not the service provider, but we do pay for that service. So I think back in October, staff was directed to monitor the budget and look to see if we could perhaps do this extension of hours of operation the last part of the first year of the transit master plan in the current fiscal year. So staff have done some analysis, looked at all of those things you see listed there, again, mainly maintenance, personnel, fuel costs, that kind of stuff, and determined that for a full year of that extension of hours of operation, the cost would be about $1.1 million, and that's broken out there, some additional software and the extended hours. The cost to implement that for a partial year, so if we were to try to do something in the current year, it would be around $250,000 to $300,000. But if we look at that $500,000 shortfall and add on some logistical challenges that we think we would have just in turning around another service change so close to the one that we just implemented on January 5th, we really don't think that that's something that is a wise move in the current fiscal year. And again, to kind of reiterate that, go back to that $800,000 increase to fund balance that we would estimate right now. If you take out that $500,000 shortfall in transit, which is likely the source that we would utilize, we would go to the general fund to subsidize that transit cost, and you're likely to see a budget amendment at some point later in the year to do just that. That really leaves us with about $300,000 in estimated, again, revenues over expenses for the year. And while that might seem like a lot of money, if you think about it in the context of a $130 million budget, it's actually a pretty narrow margin. And again, we'll have more information, we'll be able to refine these numbers as we go forward, but as it stands right now, I think this is kind of where we're at for the current fiscal year.
It's less than 1%.
Right, it's about 1/4%, I believe, give or take.
And so can I ask a quick question about the transit piece?
Absolutely.
So what we know is that we have been underpaying Buncombe County for some period of time for the paratransit service. But this increase that you're talking about is not yet truing that up. That this increase is because of more riders and longer trips. Is that right?
It's a combination. We'll have Jessica.
Okay.
Morris.
Hi, Jessica Morris, Assistant Director of Transportation. It is a combination of both. So
Okay.
if you see the FY20 budget, we had estimated $735,000, and that is what the county told us back in April. But as Taylor mentioned, we and they are seeing much larger number of trips and a larger distance. So we pay per person and the mileage that those trips are. And so at the end of this year, we expect to see the actual expense be about 1.12 million. So the column FY21 estimate, that is what the county is estimating for this coming fiscal year. And that has, that pretty significant jump has to do with the fact that the county will be renegotiating the contract that they have with the operator. So we contract with them, they contract with an operator, much like we contract with an operator. And that contract is going to be renegotiated, and they expect, based on the current market, that the rates that we'll be paying for per person and per mile are going to increase. So that's sort of the evolution of the last several years of the city's paratransit costs.
And Jessica, I know the question would be, and why are we being a direct contractor? Because actually, we still are saving money.
Yeah, so when I first got here, one of my questions is, why are we contracting with the county and then they're contracting out? And there's three main reasons for that. One is that they are able to leverage other sources of funds, mostly related to health and human services funding. So Mountain Mobility, they operate paratransit service for us, but they also have other programs like for Medicaid transport and Social Security and different things. So they have more opportunity for different funding. And they own all of the vehicles, which is another big thing. So they have all of the capital, all of the vehicles for all those services. And then the third reason is the difference in, I guess, wages for the fixed route drivers versus non-fixed route drivers, the paratransit drivers. So I'm confident that we're getting a good deal by using the county for this service.
And so does the county subsidize any of our paratransit? I think historically they have. So
Right.
So
Historically,
how's that work?
Right, so historically they have, and they came to us earlier this calendar year and wanted to have a conversation about that. So they've been paying 40 to 50% of the cost on our behalf, and we had a conversation with them about trying to get out of that situation where they're subsidizing this particular piece of our transit, of the region's transit system. And so the idea is that starting in fiscal year 21, there would be no more subsidy on the county's behalf. And the current year that we're in, they are, I would say, generously continuing their subsidy. They kind of split the difference with us and gave us some of their urban transit money back so that we could pay for additional costs.
So how much of the fiscal 21 estimate is based on the fact that the county, and and I'm certainly not suggesting they haven't been very generous, et cetera, but the county reducing their subsidy from 20 to 21.
I'm going to say generally probably around 400,000. But again, the big jump between FY '20 and '21 also has something to do with the rates and the renegotiation of the contract. But they've been spending $400,000 or so the last couple of years, and don't want to do that anymore.
And if there's been a suggestion that the county assist the city if we were to choose to go to fare free. So, and the number that has been thrown out is $1 million. So basically, because they're reducing their subsidy, that really would only be an increase of $600,000. And then probably if we went to fare free, that would also increase the cost of paratransit, right?
Because it would also have to be free.
Because that would also have to be increased. So the $1 million really wouldn't really be $1 million, I guess is what I'm asking.
The short answer is yes, and we're going to be preparing a more detailed analysis of fare free. It absolutely has an impact on paratransit because we're federally required to only charge twice as much as what we charge for fixed routes. So 2 times 0 is 0. And the revenue, the fares that we get from paratransit aren't that much. But really the part about zero fare, which I support, and I think it's a great endeavor, there's a very large impact from doing so because you get a lot more people that want to ride the bus. It's a great problem to have, but it has a impact on your capacity. And typically when you roll out something like a zero fare program, you're also coupling that with more frequency so that you don't see, especially during peak hours, you don't see these buses being over capacity and you end up leaving people on the side of the road. So typically cities that are doing zero fare, they're doing that at the same time as adding significantly more frequency on their routes so that they don't have overcrowding. But we're going to do some more number crunching because the routes that we currently see some overcrowding issues, well, I should say currently as in 2 weeks ago and before that, a lot of what we launched on January 5th was meant to help that situation. So it's going to take us a couple months of data gathering to see how that's shaken out with the new service.
But again, you would, at this point, I mean, I know we don't have the numbers yet with the increased service, but you would not necessarily characterize our buses as empty.
No.
And they will not be empty even, I mean, they're not empty now.
No.
And so the push suggesting that fare free just would fill up our buses is interesting, but that not necessarily reflect of the facts.
Correct.
Thank you.
I just have one other question. I'm sorry, Jessica. Just to make sure I understood this correctly. So, with respect to fare free, if we went fare free for our regular transit, is it the law that we would have to go fare free for paratransit?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And Jessica, do you know off the top of your head what is the cost, the true cost of a paratransit trip?
Oh, I don't know that off the top of my head. My guess would be more in the range of $10 a person.
But we can only charge $2.
Correct.
So that's twice our current fare.
Correct. And
So one thing I would be interested in, and you sort of have to have this somewhere in order to come up with these numbers. But what I'm interested in is the sort of generally the number of people who are riding paratransit, the cost per person, the total cost, and then the cost for the city, the subsidy that we pay, and then I didn't realize, and then the cost per mile as well, and I didn't realize we also paid a cost per mile, and you know, again, I'd be curious to know how that has jumped in the last, well, in this current budget year. And do we know why? I mean, that's good. We like that people are riding the bus. That means they're moving around, they're getting where they need to go. But do we know why?
We don't, and the
Such
county's not sure. It's not something that we all advertise, so we're really not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And did the county, so we share a lot of things with the county, and to Gwen's point, they've been generous in subsidizing this for quite a while. That might have been, I don't know how intentional that was. It could be it just sort of got lost in the mail, so to speak. But do we know why they're stepping back from that? And I guess I'll just, from my perspective, everybody who lives in the city also lives in the county. The county, as somebody said, typically deals with health and human services issue, which is directly what this service is. It makes logical sense to me, whether it was by action or intention, that they would help cover this cost for these residents that live in both places. So did they offer a reason why they wanted to step back?
Not any direct reason. I think that their request makes sense when you think about it as them being a contractor. So let's say they were,
Sure.
but I think.
We wouldn't, and I think I've heard this analogy, we wouldn't expect any other contractor to subsidize, but again, they're not any other contractor. They're our
That's
sister
true.
government, and we all live in the county as well, so.
That's true.
it's-
And we are still trying to have conversations with the county, and I know many of you all at an elected official level are having conversations about the county participating at a higher, I guess, level. Also, as part of the manager's report at the council meeting, we'll be presenting this similar information, as well as, quite frankly, I know we're caught up in what it's going to cost us to extend additional services, but I hope that we can celebrate that our January 5th route extensions, all that happened without a glitch, at least so far. So I would like for us to at least commend
Yeah.
Jessica and Ken and all the work the transit staff has done to achieve that.
It's been great.
Thanks.
Thank you for good things.
All right. So I think we're on to next fiscal year. So first, we just wanted to give you a little bit of a process update on what we've done so far. Internally, staff, we actually moved up our management team retreat to kind of kick the process off. We did that in October this year. And one of the things that the department directors came to that meeting with was really identifying facility and infrastructure maintenance as a high priority for them. And we're trying to make sure that we're staying true to that as we move through the budget process. Departments are on the back end of completing their operating and capital requests. And we're sort of at a point where we have a lot of information and we're just starting to do the analysis. So again, we'll have a lot more information for you all at your retreat and as we continue to go through the budget process, but that's just kind of where we are internally. Externally, we went around to the boards and commissions and gave a brief presentation, just trying to provide some information about how our budget process works. We're hoping to continue to share information with boards and commissions, again, as we share information with you all and keep them updated on the budget process as it goes forward. We've also shared some information about capital and financing specifically, as well as some very preliminary forecast information with Council's Finance and HR Committee. I think we did that in November, maybe. So they've seen some of that. And again, you'll get all of that stuff at the retreat. So kind of where we're at right now is the bright blue council work session, January 14th. Already talked about the stuff that's happened to date. moving forward, you see February, March, April, you all have several opportunities for us to come again, share information with you, get some feedback. All of that will culminate in the manager's proposed budget on May 12th. We'll have the budget public hearing May 26th, and then hopefully council adoption of the budget on June 9th. So that's just kind of a very high level where we're going over the next few months. So to get a little bit more into the details, preliminary revenue projections, property tax growth, we're expecting to be kind of where it's been for the last few years, somewhere between 2 and 3%. Again, had a recent meeting with the tax assessor, and I think that's where they're at too. Moderating sales tax growth. We've seen some really strong sales tax growth over the last few years, kind of coming out of the Great Recession. And it's not that we're expecting no growth or low growth, just perhaps not as strong as we've seen over the last few years. We also have the additional, kind of the last piece of the property and sales tax from the Mission HCA sale. The property tax piece is about 1.5 million of that 2.2. And then we have minor growth in some other revenues. And all of that together, we think right now, again, very early in the process, is going to get us somewhere between $5 and $6 million of additional revenue in the general fund. So on the expense side, and these are examples, this is not exhaustive lists of all of the things that we expect to see increases in, but just kind of wanted to give a little flavor. Already kind of talked about this, a full year of transit service improvements. So basically the improvements that started January 5th, funding those for a full year in addition to addressing that shortfall that we have in the current year. We're going to have some capital assets, some roads and sidewalks and green space and greenways come online down in the River Arts District as the Rad Tip project wraps up. So we're going to need some resources to make sure that we maintain that moving forward. We'll have what are standard increases in personnel costs, so cost of living adjustments. We've actually, over the last few years, been able to not increase our employer or employee contribution to our healthcare fund, but we think we're probably at a point now where we're going to have to bump that up a little bit. And then we also have an ongoing state mandated increase for retirement contribution for employees. One other thing just to note, again, going back to the class and comp and the 31.2, to jump down there a little bit, that $6 to $8 million includes some estimate of that. Again, that's part of the reason why that's sort of a wide range, because we're not firm on what those numbers are. But obviously, to the earlier point, we will, whatever we do in the current year, we will carry forward in the next year, and that'll be part of the base budget. The last thing is the capital debt model. Basically, as our property tax base grows, that's just a percentage of that goes into the capital model. So that allocation will grow as well. So we're thinking somewhere between, again, $6 to $8 million in additional operating costs.
Does the first bullet item, the transit service improvements, include the extended hours?
No.
It does not.
That is just.
It's just what we did January.
It's just
Correct.
doing it fully, okay. And then the additional ongoing personnel costs, that's this kind of like if you just do a standard sort of average employee pay raise across the board.
Right.
Does it include at all the $15 an hour? It does include implementing that?
Again, a rough, based on our limited information that we have now, a rough estimate
Okay,
of what that might cost.
with the compaction?
With compression.
Compression?
We don't know the answer to that because we don't have a better.
Right.
So
we
it's-
can put something in there, right?
Well, you can see, it says,
196.
it says 6 to 8 million, so that,
There's
yeah.
something in there.
So,
Yes.
okay, so when I first saw this, I thought the first bullet did include the
yeah.
extended hours, which would be another 1.1.
Right. And we have a slide, we'll kind of break all of
I'm
that
jumping.
down. No, it's fine.
Jumping ahead,
But yeah, all of these things are kind of really the cost of business to continue providing the level of service that we're providing right now. Just what is that going to cost us next year, essentially? So if you were keeping track there, 5 to 6 million in additional revenue.
We're already in the hole.
6 to
Yes,
8
we got it.
in additional expenses. So I think, as you probably are not surprised to hear from us, we're seeing revenue growth that is going to get eaten up by ongoing operating cost increases. And really, again, what we as staff, in the budget office with the manager and with the departments, what we're trying to work on right now and over the next few months is to try to get those two numbers as close to each other as possible. To try to get those, our kind of what we call our base budget to balance. So that's really the work that we're doing right now. And again, we will come to y'all as we have new information and updated numbers. We'll share those with you.
Just one question on the for the retreat. You guys will also have, I assume, the updated 5-year model with all this in there as well.
Yep, that's correct. All right, I think that's the end of me. So Barbara's up next.
That's all. Too good of a resource. Not the end of you.
Just like in the movie, you die,
All
just
right.
like in the movie.
So Barbara Whitehorn, Chief Financial Officer, thank you, Mayor and Council, for meeting with us and listening to our somewhat long-winded, but I think tremendously interesting presentation. So first we wanted to make sure that y'all really understood, like when we're talking about the strategic investments that align with your goals, there are a lot of things that we have accomplished or are implementing right now. So we wanted to present those first and then talk about the requests that we got from departments that align with your strategic goals for next year. So as you can see, we are making progress in transportation and accessibility, clean and healthy environment, and financially resilient city. We have quite a few things. The new fire station will be LEED certified. That was a council requirement that was passed some years ago that we had to have a LEED certified building, so that will be. Solar panels, we are now looking at doing roof replacements that are solar ready so that we don't have to try to figure out how to get solar panels on after the fact. Obviously, the electric bus purchases are a big deal too. We've been accomplishing a lot, I think. In affordable housing, bond-funded purchases, we're working quite a bit on that. And then you've seen updates to the land use incentive grants and the fee rebate policy that hopefully will make those public-private partnerships with developers easier to manage, and maybe we can bring some more developers to the table to get some more affordable housing in the city. Well-planned and livable community. These were also things that you supported when we were talking about doing the budget for this fiscal year, and then thriving local economy. So moving on to strategic investments for next year that we've seen alignment in the requests coming from the departments. Obviously, staff supports additional funds for quality affordable housing. I think we're all in agreement that that's incredibly necessary for the city. Clean and healthy environment, additional solar investments, the solid waste master plan and the position to go with that, and then urban forest management within the city as well. The UDO overhaul is something that we've all heard a lot about, and that's certainly something that staff would like to see happen. And then in financially resilient city, obviously the compensation study is very important to us for recruitment and retention, and really having the best people in place to, manage your city and work here. And then facility and infrastructure maintenance continues to be a significant priority for staff at pretty much every level.
And Barbara, if I
Yes,
could,
please.
please don't take these as budget recommendations. These are requests that we have received. They are under review, but we've got lots of others that have been requested. These are just examples that have very, very direct linkage to your strategic initiatives, at least the focus areas.
Exactly. We have quite a bit more, obviously, than what we're presenting here. But as Deborah said, these are the specific things that align with your strategic goals as identified. So we pulled out transportation and accessibility separately because it has very specific numbers attached and goals. The base budget for next year, which includes, of course, the full year implementation, adds $2.5 million for transit. And that includes the paratransit increases, the fuel and electricity, and the annualized January 5th implementation. Additional services that strategically we would like to see funded, or we know are strategically aligned, are the remainder of the Transit Master Plan Year 1. That's about 1.1 million for a full year. And then the Transit Master Plan Year 2, the 1.1 million there, I would like to point out, is a very rough estimate. Jessica wanted to make sure that you understood that saying that's 1.1 is still very up in the air, because we haven't done as much legwork on that implementation as we have on the Year 1 portion. So those are the transit strategically aligned requests that we've seen. Capital investments, we're doing quite a bit. Annually, we contribute about 15 million, about 12% of the general fund, to the capital model, which is our long-range plan for capital investment and debt service. And as you've seen in a few other presentations that we've given, in the last 6 years, we have spent more on capital and invested more in the infrastructure of the city than in the 20 years before that. So it's a lot to be proud of in the last 6 years, I think. Additional needs, facility and infrastructure maintenance. The facilities that we work in are kind of bursting at the seams. That's a very high priority for the management team. Significant unfunded needs. We've got about 125 projects that have been identified at over 600 million. Those are, that's a lot of projects. That's not projects that people want to do tomorrow. These are projects in a much longer time frame than that. So when I say 600 million, don't think, oh my gosh, they want to issue $600 million in debt. That's not the case at all. We want to
We
make
would like
sure-
to, we just can't.
Right, we would love to, but the reality is that's not a financially resilient city, right? So we want to have in front of you, though, what really needs to happen to get the city where you would like it to be.
Well, and of note of this, as I mentioned last time we talked about this, when you talk about a city projecting over multiple years $600 million in capital projects to spread across 125 projects, typically we would see partnerships from the state or federal government on transportation projects. We would see the room tax being used for some of these projects. I mean, I think in this is upwards of 100 million of it is Thomas Wolfe alone, which is something we would be looking towards the TDA to help fund that project. So, I think it's important to note that it's not all planned to be shouldered by the city.
Right, it certainly wouldn't be. I don't think it would be reasonable for any city to say we're going to pay 100% for everything, because you want to always ask who benefits and who should pay, and try to leverage as many partnerships that you can, whether it's with other governments, as you said, at the federal or state level, or if we're looking at actual private partnerships with organizations within the city that want to see a better Thomas Wolfe, because it would benefit them as well.
Barbara, is the 600 million the new 330 million, or are those different numbers?
It is
It is the new 330 million?
It's the new
It's the new
330. Yeah. So every year.
Can you stop asking that
we'll just see
question
if
so
we
it
can
doesn't
scare you
double
more
again?
each year.
I know, right?
All right, and then, of course, you all are aware that the capital debt model has limited capacity at this point to fund anything. Anything more. Yes, anything more. It absolutely funds everything that we currently have in the plan, because that's the point of why we developed the model. So Taylor talked about that revenue growth is expected to be used up by the ongoing operating cost increases, and any new strategic investments are going to require some kind of new revenue stream. That's something that, speaking at the retreat, we can talk about where we want to go with revenue and what we think the best direction is for that. And the council retreat plan from a budget standpoint is we will affirm the guiding principles, talk about the 5-year forecast, give you more detailed budget information. Some of the numbers will still not be great. It's not like we'll suddenly have 7 or 8 months of sales tax, but we will have a slightly better place. We will have done all the technical reviews with the departments, which gives us a better handle on the expenditures. And we'll talk alignment with council priorities. And if there's anything else you all want us to add, now is the time to let us know. All right, and that's it. Questions?
I do have something to add.
Yes.
But do other people have questions before that? Okay. Mine is not a question. It's to a point that you just made, that new.
So do you want Barbara to be able to sit down?
You can sit down, yes, if you would like to. Thank you. So this has been a great presentation. Thanks to Taylor and Barbara and Jessica as well. I think it's no secret that we are challenged. We continue to be challenged from a budget perspective to meet the priorities that our community has identified, that council has identified, and to a point made in the slide before, if we're going to do anything new, we need a new source of revenue. And so late last year, I mean, we got a preview presentation of this at the Finance Committee maybe in October or November. And as I think we all do, I started thinking about budget priorities for the coming year and how were we going to try to advance a lot of the goals that we have set for ourselves as a community and as a council. And it became clear that to do the things that I personally want to see done that are new, we were going to need a new revenue source. So as we all know, and we've talked about all of these things up here, the council has prioritized transit. We still have an affordable housing crisis, and we constantly need to create new tools to address that. We have both old and new commitments around carbon reduction goals and renewable energy. And thanks to Asheville Greenworks, none of us can argue about the role that trees and an urban forest play in trying to meet the climate crisis that is in front of us right now. So I was trying to figure out a way to fund these priorities generally, but also in a way that would not pit them against each other and have competing interests and organizations coming to us in a way that was, I think, confusing for the public and really didn't give us any options. So to that end, late last year, I pulled together the advocates in our community that have been working on these issues for quite some time, and I'll just list those quickly. Asheville Greenworks, Just Economics, the Sierra Club, Mountain True, Sunrise Movement, Western North Carolina Renewables Coalition, as well as representatives from SACE and our Urban Forest Commission. Pulled those together. I also immediately called Councilman Young, who has long been an advocate of transit and affordability, and had at that time sort of recently had become a new voice on the climate crisis front. And so together, Councilman Young and I have been working with those groups to come up with a proposal to generate new revenue. And let me pass a couple of those this way. And this is actually, for those of you who have seen this before, there's actually some some FAQs on the back, so this is a little bit new. Sure, that'd be great, Maggie. And there are some copies, there are some folks in the audience who have copies if people want to see them as well. But together, we have created a proposal that will generate $4.5 million new dollars from a 3-cent property tax increase. And as you will see in just a minute, that will fund the priorities that we have set out on transit, renewable energy and energy conservation, urban forestry, and some new investments in affordability. And we are calling this a climate and affordability funding response. So there's nothing new in here that people will not have seen before. And believe me, if there were another way for us to fund this without looking to a property tax increase, we would have considered it. But given the restraints that the legislature places on local governments and our ability to generate new revenue, a property tax is really the only option we have to make these investments now. I will say that there has been a lot of conversation around that table about equity and the impact of a 3-cent property tax increase on low, moderate, and fixed income households. And I have asked the finance department to look for options that are available and legal in North Carolina to help mitigate the impact of such a property tax increase on those folks. And I understand that research is happening. There's at least one other city that is doing that is moving ahead with a program that would help mitigate property tax increases on lower income folks. And I look forward to getting some information back from the finance department about those options as we move through the budget process. And I also want to recognize, I mean, we just got through a huge presentation about the city's many, many, many priorities and base funding needs. And so we realize these are not the only things on the table for consideration in terms of the new budget. Other council members will have their own priorities as well. But I think we wanted to put this on the table as a starting point for conversation and as a way to just take a first step in trying to advance these very important issues that, again, have been identified multiple times as priorities by our community and by members of council. So with that, I'll turn it over to Keith if he wants to add anything.
Sure, the only thing that I would add would just say that I think this is definitely in line with our shared values as a community. I think these are definitely priorities that we've heard loud and clear that need to be funded, and we've seen here this afternoon that we don't have many options to do this. And so when you look at this proposal of $4.5 million going toward renewables, going toward public transit, going toward affordable housing, extending transit hours and so forth, these are definitely priorities that the community share and value, and we will definitely need to move this forward in order to be a more resilient community for the future. And so as we move forward through our budget process and everything else this fiscal year, it is my hope that we will be able to accomplish this and be able to put forward the things in our community that folks are asking us to do, but not only that they're asking us to do, that we need to do in order to make our city a better place. And this impacts people in a way that is going to be beneficial to quality of life for everyone, no matter what spectrum you're on.
Relative to this proposal, I would like to understand how this would affect rental, people who rent properties. Given that we've got, I mean, we say impact on property owners, so it looks like, oh, well, it's only the people that own houses, but I suspect that landlords won't eat this. So I'd like to understand typically how that would affect rents in, you know, how that usually works. Like, is it typically, do landlords tend to add on top, or what's that effect? Because that is half of the people of Asheville, and so it's not just property owners that would be affected by more property taxes.
And we have talked about that as well. Obviously, we're very concerned about people who are renting, because those are often folks with lower incomes, and I think that we haven't identified any clear strategies about that, but there could be, you know, just as we offer incentives to, you know, this program here, the new housing voucher pilot project is, you know, offering some incentives to landlords to house to offer housing for people with vouchers, you know, I would ask whether we could do a similar thing for landlords. If you don't raise the rent correspondingly to address this property tax increase, is there some way we can still help compensate landlords for that? So that's just another area, I think, for exploration as a way to try to mitigate the impact of this on lower income folks.
Right.
Any other?
I've got some comments in my own, if that's appropriate at the time.
Remember, this is just our first.
It is, I know, but
Pace
I
yourself.
think it's, well, like Councilwoman Mayfield and Councilwoman Young, I've also been spending a lot of time trying to think about what next year's budget should look like and what some of the priorities are. And one of the main concerns that I have really is funding our basic services across the city. And a lot of that is being driven by what I'm seeing across the city. And that is not to say that what's being discussed today, what we're going to discuss at the retreat, aren't important priorities. They clearly are. Sustainability, transit, all those things are critical. But as council members, we have an obligation to appropriately fund basic services that all of our residents depend on. We have a duty to make sure that all of our residents are kept safe, that they can depend on having clean drinking water, that the roads they travel on are maintained, and that their tax dollars are being efficiently and effectively used to provide basic services. If we, as a council, aren't fulfilling those responsibilities, we are failing at our jobs. And despite the many good things that are happening across the city, and there are, and Deborah talks about them, and staff should be very proud of them, the facts are we are seeing some problems across the city. We are seeing a heroin and drug needle litter crisis in West Asheville and downtown that is being accompanied by a significant jump in property crime. We've had several recent water outages caused by outdated water infrastructure that have hurt residents and local businesses. We have some of the worst roads of any city in the state, and we have unmet capital needs of now over $600 million, including for building new fire stations. And we're having trouble hiring and recruiting many of our city employees who provide the very services that all of our residents expect. So from my perspective, to address these immediate problems, from my perspective, I believe that our next budget has to have funding to address the heroin and drug needle litter emergency, funding to ensure that our water system infrastructure is dependable so that we do not have a public health disaster, a responsible bond program that begins to fund our infrastructure and capital needs that have been ignored for years, and funding for appropriate wage adjustments for employees who deliver the services that all of us depend on. Now, I'm a realist. I do this work for a living. I realize nothing of what I have just listed is going to come cheap. But again, as council members, we have an obligation to make that happen. And I certainly appreciate what was proposed today. This is clearly well thought out. I commend Council Member Young and Councilwoman Mayfield for putting this together. You'll note that they actually had the courage to talk about how it would be funded. And I think that's important. That's not an easy thing for council members to do. But from my perspective, we have got to first get our house in order by taking meaningful action on our obvious public health, safety, and quality of life issues.
Yeah, I'll add something else. Just want to commend everybody for, I know there was that one slide up there that said for our strategic investments in capital, we've spent more in the last 6 years than we've spent in 20 years. So I'll just say that again. We've spent more money in the last 6 years than we spent in the last 20. And I didn't hear anything about core services that was off, so I won't assume that they're off. So anyway, thank you.
The only thing, food for thought, the only thing that I'm thinking about in the context of this sort of 30,000 foot is, we do have a large capital needs. We don't have to find $600 million on 1 year or anything like that, but I had the opportunity to sit in on the final review from the accreditation entity that has accredited our fire department. This is a national organization that comes in and evaluates your fire department performance, response times, how they get excellent marks across the board. But one noted area that needs improvement is our firehouses are outdated. I mean, literally how we store gear. In some cases, the gear is located in the same area where the men and women are sleeping, and that is not an acceptable practice any longer. Of course, these firehouses were designed before those health concerns were known. So that's just an example. And I think long ago, maybe it wasn't that long ago, because Deborah, you were here, we looked at capital needs around just public safety. At that time, I think we identified at least 50 million. It's probably, I'm not including the new firehouse number. 13. Are we going to really number at 13? That seems like a bad idea. So where I'm going with this is that it seems like we might be due for another run at a general obligation bond referendum. And obviously, we don't have the debt capacity in our current budget to pay for those additional capital investments, and we would have to raise property taxes to do that. It wouldn't be this year. If we put the issue on the November ballot, it would be, we would raise the taxes right in the next budget season. So I just, before we go raising property taxes this year for these very, very valid and important, I'm not saying they're not, and I want to figure out how we do this. I just want to make sure long range we're not foreclosing an opportunity that we're really going to need to take advantage of. And I also wonder too if there isn't a way to structure a bond that it includes some of the environmental initiatives that might be found on this. What you promised me is a starting place for conversation. Like for example, what if we retrofitted our firehouses to all accommodate solar panels, and so we added a green element to the very great need we have to redo our firehouses anyway. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I would like to kind of explore all opportunities to best leverage the funds we do have, and we don't raise property taxes every year. It's not. I think the last time we did do it was in connection with the 2016 bond. So, and I don't think folks are willing to accommodate us routinely raising property taxes. So I'd like to be sparing with that. So I just put that out there. I'm not taking a hard line one way or another on these. I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way to fold different projects into different revenue options.
No, that makes total sense, and any politician should, any elected official should propose a property tax with great trepidation, which is what we've done.
Especially when they ran for office.
Well, the other way to look at that is that I'm a short timer here, and these are priorities that I came into office with and would like to see significant movement on. That's one of my personal motivations. And I think there are options here, like the money that is proposed to be set aside for renewable energy. I think our intention is really that would go toward increasing our debt capacity, so we could turn that 1.5 million into actually a lot of money to fund a lot of projects, not doing that pay as you go at all.
Yeah, that would be a better way to leverage that.
Yeah,
line item,
absolutely,
probably.
absolutely.
Okay, all right, well, did you have any?
I don't have anything, just only to thank you all in the audience for attending. This is the beginning. It is definitely not the end. As you can see, we've got lots of analysis, additional information we need to bring back to you all, but thank you very much for your input.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll be back at 5.